Thank you very much. So yes, I'll be the moderator. Thank you so much for coming this evening. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, but I'll just tell you a little bit about me. I am the SVP of the Digital Lifestyle at Tech practice here at Environics, and we're an integrated communications agency full service. And what's really exciting for us to host this session around killer presentations is that we're very big across the agency through all our practices around storytelling. That's a really big focus for us, and it'll be really interesting to see how we talk about storytelling through presentations. So I'll just hand it over to you.
Cool. Good evening, everyone. My name is Diane Chaban. I am an investment advisor at RBC Dominion Securities, and day to day I manage my clients' wealth so that it continues to grow and we preserve it, and so that they pay less taxes to the CRA and leave more money to those that they love. From a presentation perspective, I'm doing presentations every day, whether it's one-on-one with my clients or the way I've grown my business is hosting lots of advice events and social events, and I even founded a women's group in particular for women entrepreneurs and professionals so that we can collaborate together and enhance one another's businesses. I don't feel like you just define yourself by what you do. Personally, I live in Toronto. I'm married to a really tall man. I fell off of his shoulders 8 years ago and broke my neck, and that's why we're together. And I really love Scotch and collect it. That's about me.
All right, I can't top that. Did not fall off another man's shoulders. My name is Paul Zakopoulos. I'm the Vice President of Big Data Analytics at IBM. I've been there 21 years, which is hard to believe for me to think that I've been at that place 21 years in my graduating class. I spent 12 years inside the research and development lab here in Toronto. I think there's Shadia there. She knew that they kicked me out because I wasn't a very good coder. And then I spent the last probably decade with clients and kind of bridging the gap of business and tech together. I publish a lot. I've written a number of books, a number of dummies books and other books on big data. I speak a lot at events, and so I'll try to share with you my successes and failures along that path and help make you guys deliver killer presentations.
Okay, so I'm done. Whoa. Can you turn my volume down slightly, please? Or I'll just whisper. So I'm Duncan Stewart. I'm Director of Research for Deloitte in the areas of tech, media, and telecom. I help write a report every year called Predictions, and then I go around the world talking about it, from sometimes 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people, oftentimes just a couple people. And so they're all different presentations, and I hope one of the things we'll be able to explore is how do you scale up and scale down?
Great, thank you so much. Why don't we start there? That's a great point to start with. Why don't we start with how to scale up? So how do you give presentations? You mentioned you do a number of different kinds of environments, different kinds of formats. How do you do that where you talk to 4,000 or you're talking to 1 or 2 people?
Fairly obviously, 4,000, you yell much louder. It's actually, in my view, and I'm going to say this, there's a bunch of things I'm going to tell you tonight that I think probably apply to me, and it's the exact opposite for my colleagues here. So I think a lot of it is finding out what works for you. But what I do is that I find a narrative, I find a story, or actually a sequence of stories. And the stories, the jokes, the slides, the visuals are largely the same from 4,000 to 4. Because what works when you create a sense that people interact with. So it is about crafting that, finding the best. I mean, obviously, if you've got a 10-minute presentation or a 90-minute presentation, you're going to end up cutting out an awful lot of material for the shorter one. But I honestly believe that you should not attempt to reinvent yourself over and over. I find what works, you adapt it. Though one thing obviously though is, and this is a story from way back, one of my friends was a coloratura soprano. And I was giving her a ride home. I was at UBC, and I asked her, could you do me a favor and sing me something? I'd never heard her sing, and she said no. And I said, well, you haven't warmed up yet? And she said, no. The vocal techniques that you use to fill a concert hall will blow the windows out of my extremely old and rusty car. Therefore, when I say that the story with 4004 is the same, that is true. But the techniques you use, the modulation, the interaction, the ability to pull questions, responses, more interactivity, that varies enormously. Obviously, when you're talking to 4,000, it's much more of a, you can try picking a face out, making eye contact here or there, but it's really tough. So it becomes much less personal, much less about reading cues and body language, and much more of a speech and less of a conversation.
Yeah, some of those things I think that I experienced as well. So, like, I'm trying to think when I did Hadoop Strata 2 years ago in New York. It was 5,000 people. I actually find it easier to present in front of super large groups than very small groups. And I'm probably like yourself. I try to interject some. Am I getting censored back there? Or? No, we're good? I'm muted. All right. So I try to inject some humor. And then in a large conversation, the difference is there won't be as much interaction. It doesn't say mute, by the way. Yeah, you're good. There won't be as much interaction, right? If I was with a small group like this at a user group or something, people will ask me questions, and that will have me go a little deeper. I really focus on a narrative and a story, but even more so on the larger keynotes. And I find that you have a swell, right? I'm not going to hit you. You have a swell of stuff, right? You're going to kind of capture their attention. You're not going to be able to hold attention like that. So you got to pick your spots where I capture attention in a large audience. Then it'll come down as you have to deliver the message or the marketing or the story, and then find a way to bring it back up. Typically, that's a running demo or a live conversation or a narrative you talked about. So I find larger easier. For smaller, the way I would scale that down into groups, if it was a group like this, is to understand what are these folks looking for? What is their skill level, right? Because I don't want to waste their time. And then all the way down to 2 or 3 people, like even under 10, I'll pull in LinkedIn profiles, go understand their background, go check out some stuff about them and personalize it more. So some techniques vary, and then some techniques I alternate in sizes.
I don't know if I would add much more. I think I would just say that when I have a smaller group, I stick to what I do want to say, but I tell them that it's become more of a conversation, and I encourage them to ask questions and throw me off if they want to, and then it becomes more of a dialogue. Whereas if it's a larger group, of course, you would never really encourage that too much because you might not get to what you really want to accomplish. And then I also will make sure that I swap and switch swiftly into that type of format if I am doing an event and I expect a really big turnout and then only 4 or 5 people come, and then so you forget about the PowerPoint and you just kind of go with the flow. And
by the way, that is the worst.
Yeah.
When you have a room of 80 people and you got that Friday afternoon session and 6 people show up, that's the hardest presentation to give, right? Like that. Even if you got in some jokes, then you're like, oh, see, the good thing about 5,000 people is I only got to get about 300 people to get the joke. They'll laugh, and it's like it's like a bad cold, right? Then the next guy will laugh, and the next gal gets contagious. But 6 people, man, that's when you're in a huge room is horrible. 6 people in a little boardroom is fine. And trust me, the 6 people will be at the back, just like this front row is almost empty. It'll be the same way. So,
One thing I would add is in Shakespeare's plays, all of the comedies have the same structure. At the beginning, everybody's happy and singing in the forest. A couple of bad things happen in the middle, and at the end, everybody marries each other.
Or dies.
No, these are the comedies. Very few deaths in the comedies. Some, but not as many. Tragedy is the other way around. At tragedy, everything kind of looks pretty terrible at the beginning. There's kind of a period in the middle where it's going to go okay, and then everybody's dead on stage at the end. All of them follow this pattern. When you're writing speeches, please write comedies. But it's exactly what you said. You start hard, start with a bang, pump everybody up, drop it down, you have a kind of slower numbers in the middle, and then you bring energy back up at the end.
Yeah.
So, is that how you keep people engaged? Like, how do you keep them engaged when you're maybe up there for an hour? I've seen you a number of times, Duncan. So how do you do that where you just keep them engaged throughout?
Did you ever see that Celine Dion documentary where the producer George Martin was talking to Celine? And she said, well, what I normally do is I start off by singing as loud as I possibly can with as many high notes, and then I just keep getting louder and louder and higher. And he said, have you ever thought about varying your tone and volume slightly? And she said, that never occurred to me. It's about up, down, and there's that super arc, but then there's little mini arcs in between.
Yeah, like I know when I have a story, a narrative, 60 minutes is a long time for a keynote for an individual. I don't think that happens as much, but 40 minutes for sure, but sometimes 6. I just did one in Orlando. To your point, you have that narrative, and you know when the audience is going to get a little stale, and because you got to deliver a message. And so what I find is, like, I know I'm getting to a next point where I'm going to get them laughing, or I'm going to get their attention on some kind of stat or sometimes thing. So if in between there, I'll hurry myself to that. You know, it's almost like I'll skip a stanza if it was a piece of music sheet to get to there if I find that they're getting tired or people are kind of nodding off to sleep and stuff. But so you have to know your story, right? That's it, so, yeah.
And do you find that, so when you say you have to notice and if they're nodding off, you move, do you think that presentation, that skill is a talent or is it practice? So do you find that you guys are naturally inclined, you have this talent for it and that's how you started to do it? Or is it just the practice of doing it over and over again that really where you were able to hone that skill? Maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. I think the answer is both. So the talent comes from whether or not you just feel comfortable being at the front of a room, right? I think there's just a group A that does and a group B that doesn't. So then if you're in that group B, then practice absolutely makes perfect. Like if I go a little while without presenting and then I'll get up, I'm always my own worst critic and I'll sit down and I'll be like, oh, that sucked. You know, and then I'll even maybe reach out and get some feedback and I'll hear that it was great. I don't know what you were thinking about, but I felt out of practice. And so practice absolutely makes a difference and is important, I think.
I think if I looked at my kid, Chloe, she's a talented horseback rider and she practices all the time. So it's that simple. So I do like 100 keynotes a year and talks a year. And I won't say I don't practice, I prepare. So I think as Abe Lincoln made a statement once that was...
sharpening the axe.
Yeah, if I had 8 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 6 hours sharpening my axe. And I probably spent 7.5 hours sharpening my axe. I don't practice much. But I remember my first time, when I first went on stage, it was because it was horrible. It was one of the worst presentations that I've ever seen. It was my own presentation. And you will be your own critic. You will know everything that went wrong in your own presentation, right? But I think as you do it more and more, it's almost like agile development, right? As you circle more and more and you keep doing it. And at the very start, if you've never done it, I used to practice in front of a mirror and time it. And at that Strata conference, I think I had a 20-minute keynote. And it was so tight, I actually practiced it. But it will be more practice it, but it doesn't mean necessarily standing up and trying it. So it's talent and preparation or practice. I think more preparation than practice is what you'll find yourself actualizing to.
Well, I mean, is it innate or acquired? Well, I was born wearing a lavalier. I don't believe there's such a thing as talent in public speaking. I think everybody in this room could be one of the best public speakers in the world. And the reason I know that is that I get paid to do this, and I am probably the shyest person in the room. You don't believe it looking at me, but I am incredibly introverted. I cannot go to cocktail parties. I bail on 3/4 of parties I'm invited to because I can't stand leaving the house. I hate talking in public, so I got good at it because it was something that I was bad at and I worked at. So the definition of an introvert is not somebody who can't talk in public. It's somebody for whom talking in public is incredibly difficult and it drains all the energy out of your body and you need to go lie down for 6 hours afterwards. Because that's me. And it's also John Hagel, who works at Deloitte and has 23,000 followers on. I know so many people who can light a room on fire and they hate it. They don't really hate it. We obviously have to do our job, but it's incredibly difficult. Nobody is good your first time, but as you practice, as you get better, as you learn your material, axe sharpening. I talk about 10 predictions, usually per year. Takes me about 60 minutes, 52 actually, but call it 50, 60. I spend between 80 and 120 hours researching and writing each prediction ahead of time. How confident am I up there that somebody's going to ask me a question I don't know the answer to, right? So if you've got that preparation and a lot of practice and lots of years of experience, but I honestly will push back on the idea that there are talented speakers and untalented speakers. We're all humans. We can all tell stories that our husband or wife or kids laugh at. We can be funny, we can be charming, we can be empathetic. If we can do that on a dinner date, why can't we do the same thing in front of a big room?
So my experience is a little different. I try to go to every party I can. I don't get home till about 3 in the morning, but
takes all kinds.
That's what's happening to me. But you know, I think to that point, I do think some people will naturally be more comfortable to your type A, type B. I do believe that everyone can actualize to. I will say that I always get a little nervous still when I go to present, all the time, right? And to this day, I do these little tricks in my head. Sometimes I'm sitting there right before they call me on stage, and I'm like, "You're not good enough to do this. There's too many people." All the time, right?
Do you have the runaway fantasy, or are you just the lack of confidence?
I've never actually.
I didn't say runaway. No, I thought of it. You fantasize about it.
No, I've got the. I'm not good enough to do this. Why would all these people want to hear me? Why is it? So you will always. You can be seasoned extrovert, introvert. In my opinion, you'll always have that doubt, and that's why I have that. That's why I spark up that presentation in the first 5 minutes. to get, and you listen, if you're not funny, don't try to be funny, but put in something that captures their attention. I try to put in some humor. I'm sure you use that, because once I get to that first point and I can find people that, all of a sudden we've made a connection, and then the rest will flow, is what I find, and that fear goes away. But I'll always have fear in those. I don't know about you, but
Oh yeah, I get nervous every time.
you get nervous because if they sign a contract with you, you're going to make more money. So I mean, that's pretty good.
And you talked about those techniques. So what techniques do you guys do to kind of prepare yourselves? Like how do you prepare, whether it's like, I know you talked about kind of that 120 hours, but even emotionally or physically, like how do you prepare yourself for these kinds of, because the one-on-one can be just as, or the 1-on-6 or whatever can be just as nerve-wracking as the bigger one. So how do you prepare? In terms of tips, any tricks that you can share with people?
For me, outside of
emotionally even,
preparation of material, emotionally, I just try to interact with people because I feel I'm an extrovert. I think if you're an introvert, and you could comment since you aren't one, maybe you'll go and find your own quiet place. Sometimes I kind of walk away from the crowd and I sit backstage on my own. Sometimes I mingle with the crowd. So it depends on how I feel that day and what the vibe is. That's for me. So emotionally, I don't prepare much. I prepare on the material.
I like to work the room beforehand because then I can feel a little bit more connected to everyone, and then if someone's told me a story in conversation, I can draw on it while I'm presenting and try to pull them in a bit more. From an emotional preparation, I saw this TED Talks by Amy Cuddy about body language. If you haven't seen it, I think you should. It's great. Yeah. And ever since she talked about the study they did around the power pose, I do that all the time now.
You do the pose? I don't
yeah,
know what it
so
is,
like
so,
it's really just getting in a room by yourself and going like this for at least 2 minutes.
Isn't that the starfish? A power pose, all right.
And if you can do it in a room where you look at yourself in the mirror, it's better. So like coming up here, the elevator had a mirror and I was by myself, so I was like, yes! So I just did it the whole way up. And
for the camera.
Yeah.
yeah, I know, the camera guy's probably like, what is she doing?
Streamed live on YouTube and
Yeah,
Internet things,
yeah.
but yeah.
But I mean, the Coles Notes of the idea was that they did this study and they had people go into an interview, and the first half they just didn't tell them to do anything, and they sat in the waiting room. And what do you do when you're sitting? You like look at your phone, so you're hunched over and you're really small. And then they told the other group to go and do this pose, and it was something crazy. Like all the people that did the pose got the job, and the people who didn't. I don't know if it was that drastic, but go watch the TED Talks. It's good.
So I actually have a prop, so there's a bunch of things I do. I have an entire blog post about this, by the way. So a few things. Where are we here? One of the things I do is always take your badge off. It looks terrible on stage. If they're videotaping it, it'll reflect, it'll catch the light. The other thing is, you play football, right? Yeah. What position? You play football?
Slot back.
Slot back. Do you wear a helmet? Do you wear pads?
Try to.
Yeah. It's putting on your uniform. To me, taking this off, you wear it when you mingle, but that action of taking it off and throwing it in the bag, to me, it's like, girding your loins. Okay, I'm not sure if that's politically correct in 2015. Bring your own water. They have water for you. What if they ran out? What if it fell over? What if it drained? Vocal cords, stay hydrated. What else do? I run almost every day before, if it's a really super early presentation, but I get out there, especially today I did 16 kilometers, I guess, almost every day. Taking that, there's a thing most people don't know. Do you know what chess players do to prepare for world chess tournaments? They run 20 kilometers a day. It's physically exhausting sitting at a board playing chess. How can getting up and talking to a room full of people for 45 minutes be any less? So you want to be, to me, fit. You want to have those endorphins and all that other good body chemistry going on. And then, final one for me. Okay, I usually don't finish this I bring a book. A lot of people, hey, extroverts, I love you guys.
You go off to your quiet spot,
I
right?
go off, take a book, and just before you're due on stage, take that book, sit down, and get into your zone. Read something. It shouldn't be your notes. That'll freak you out. Read a book, read anything, not your smartphone, not Facebook. Read, in my view, a book. Fiction is best. Take your brain out of whatever kind of mode that you might be freaking yourself out about, conserve your energy, and then when you hit on stage, that transition from I'm cool, I'm rested, I'm in my starting zone, man, you're going to hit it out of the park.
I agree on taking that back. I think that's a great idea. I guess I do that. I never recognize it as a flip side. I don't know about running 16K. I wouldn't make it to the speech. 16K, but that's a great tip. That's a great tip.
So you mentioned TED Talks, you're talking about reading a book. What are the things that you do to help you during the Q&A period? Because there's one thing to do the presentation, and then there's also the Q&A where you still have to be, after you've done all this and done your presentation, where you take questions from the audience. So what do you do to prepare? Is it webinars? Is it different kinds of books? Is it different articles? Is it TED Talk? How do you guys prepare for that Q&A portion?
Okay, I'll go. Two things that kind of popped into my mind there. The first is really prepare and practice to actually make that Q&A part happen. I have a really bad habit of going over time and speaking too much, and then there is no time for Q&As, and then I feel badly. So make sure you do leave at least, I don't know, 10 minutes or so for the question and answers. And then be prepared for no one to have a question. And then if they don't, be like, okay, well, here's something you might have been wondering, or leave them with a call to action to connect with you afterwards if something pops in later.
Sure. Just to that, culture. Canada's not bad. States is good. For Q&A, you'll always get questions. Israel, they won't let you finish the speech before they start asking questions. I love Tel Aviv. Sweden, lovely people, lovely people, lovely people. You could torture them with cattle prods before they ask a question in public. The Danes are like the Swedes, except slightly quieter, and apparently the Finns make both of them look outgoing. But be cool, right? Singapore is great. You get a small group of people, and they're all at the same job level. They'll ask you questions until you die. If a boss is in the room, they will not ask a single question. And you just, all this kind of stuff, boy. And I mean, did I know this before? Gosh, no. But you learn it over time. There are interesting books out there that do talk about cultural differences like that. But Q&A always, in my view, should be the most fun for you. It's a chance for you to kind of break out of that routine of the same speech you've given a bunch of times. You'll hear something, you'll get a chance to riff a little bit, not necessarily in a funny way, just to kind of explore some thoughts. I mean, my wife's in the wife is in the wealth management business. She says that she's got her canned talk about, here's my firm's performance and risk and all that. But she says it's in those questions that she really feels not merely like she's having fun, but she's differentiating herself against other people who may be less good at that.
So I agree in the cultural thing, like getting a question out of someone in Japan and you're right, if your boss is in the room. I think that's the quietest place until you go out at night when you drink and talk. For me, in a keynote, you're not apt to get questions. So my biggest problem is I have to make sure I switch from a large keynote into a smaller audience like this or smaller where I'll get questions. And I have to make sure I shorten the talk to allow for those questions. And sometimes I don't make that switch and I don't create enough interaction. So that's a fault of mine, but you have to think about that, dial where the questions are going to come from. The other thing for preparation is I actually try to tell myself there's no way I can know it all. And I know that I know who does know the answer. And in with all the writing I've done, I actually feel some people try to play stump the presenter, and it's pretty easy to do with me, but it's all research. I know my stuff, but so I'm just going to acknowledge that I don't know the answer to everything, and I try to know the answer to everything. And then with that, I go in there and I view it, take it this way, if I don't know the answer to something, I know that I'm going to find the answer. And after about, you'll probably find this, after about so many times, and same with wealth management, 90% of the questions are done by most people, right? There's not too many questions you haven't heard. And then so I try to get smarter every time I don't hear one. But the first couple cranks of the wheel is, the first time I do a presentation on a topic, I might get 10 questions on it. I only know 5 or 6, but I'll tell you, by the 5th time I do the presentation, I'll know all 10, and then I'll hear one I haven't heard before. So that's sort of attitude.
But one thing I would add is make it, and this actually goes back to something, how do you keep the energy level up in a long presentation? Who here has a working right or left arm, please? Who here has, I'll use, this is one I like doing all the time. Maybe a little case study right here. So who here has an iPhone? Who here has an iPhone and an iPad? iPhone, iPad, and a Mac. Great. iPhone, iPad, Mac, and the Steve Jobs pillowcases? But I'm getting a little market research. Who here has because you can then go and talk. Okay, great. And of those folks, the true Apple fans, who here's thinking of getting an Apple Watch.
Right.
Okay, good. But see how it works? By pulling your audience in, they have to. I just made the folks of you who are texting with two hands at least move to texting with one hand, which I think is, as a presenter, is a significant victory in 2015.
Very good.
That was good.
And sometimes you'll present, I know we're talking about in-person presentations, but I try to tell my team, and when I do it, I look at presenting on the phone even as a presentation. And sometimes when we present a plan or a pitch or a campaign or a program to a client, we'll look at it just as much as a presentation as if we were in the room. So do you find it's the same for you, that you apply the same, because you're talking with big audiences, but when you're on the phone, do you find that it's the same preparation, it's the same approach you take when you're doing it over the phone and not in person?
Over the phone's a lot more difficult. Yeah, it really sucks. Because you can't read your audience. You don't even know if they're agreeing. You don't even know if they're still paying attention. Yeah, it's a lot more difficult. Sometimes what I'll do, and I do this for a lot of my one-on-one meetings as well, is I'll send an agenda in advance and just say, here's what we're going to be covering, and please let me know if you'd like to add or change anything, which engages them beforehand. 9 out of 10 times they don't change anything, but then if they do, then they're that much more invested in what we're going to be going through. So that is a tactic that tends to work for me when I don't have that control.
I think telephone has got to be the worst medium for a presentation possible. I think that, and it's funny, we still don't do this by default at IBM. Like Google does this. Like I have friends that work there, and when you do an inter-company meeting, it's got to be high-def video. You have to be dressed up, and I mean, if they did that at IBM, it'd be like a tank top. I go for a run. You can cover your run. I hate that. If I can't see people and get that energy right, you just don't know what's going on. So that, to me, that's like flying blind. And you can't demo, right? How do I demo some stuff? How do I show value? How do I show excitement? How do you ask a question you just asked? Put your hand up. You can't. So I actually try to stay away from that. And I think video will be the right compromise.
I was going to ask, what about video?
I don't do video.
Before we get to video, there is a thing that does help, and I find works a little, especially if you're doing global, where a lot of people are worried about asking questions because they're worried that they'll say the wrong words, it'll look stupid, or accent, they won't be. There's nothing worse than asking the same question 5 times on a bad phone line and having that, so they get embarrassed, so they don't ask. If you're on something that has like a link or a Skype, it has that text question. Remind them when you start. If you have a question, we will have Q&A at the end, or you can type me a question and then keep the box open as you're presenting. Because I've found that gives you a chance to break your flow. You just don't have that sense you're yelling down a well. There's actually human beings on. So I've done that. It doesn't always work, but boy, does it make a phone presentation easier when you know there's at least one living human being out there on the other end.
Yeah. Hey, you ever had that where you keep talking and no one's on the phone?
I hate that. Yeah. Gee, they're quiet.
I get that when I call home.
Video, yeah, I've done video. It's hard. It's not much better.
Jitters?
The technology's still not there yet. The
right?
cameras that you know, the little screens you've seen on video call, it's really hard to read, especially if there's 8 people around a table. I mean, you can't tell if they're men or women, or you can't read facial expressions.
And no one ever has the video at them. It's
No.
So they're like this the whole time. You can't even see their. Yeah. It's,
I've done it.
try to avoid it. Yeah.
So since we're talking about Q&A, maybe we'll open up the floor to some questions that we'd be happy to answer. You don't need a mic. We have a mic up here, so you can just raise your hand.
You touched on a few topics I'm very curious about. The video aspect, webinars, and different videos. How, as a presenter, do you engage your audience, especially whoever? I understand the text aspect. I've seen that before. But how do you keep them very interactive on the webinar presentation?
When you're showing them slide after slide with voice. That's what we mean by phone calls.
Okay.
Yeah, because usually you've got presentation materials you're going through and you're turning it. It's death. Sometimes you have to do it. Sometimes it works. Most of the time it's.
You need the Q&A slide that you had talked about. We do that in our internal ones. At least people can ask questions. You can see dialogue and what's he saying. And I didn't like. At least there's something there. But yeah, that's what we meant.
So basically the same sort of strategy.
Yeah, I like to avoid it, but sometimes you're going to have to do it. But
Volumes, pause, try to find, maybe there's 3 natural breaks in your talk. Pause, stop, and say to the moderator, are they still there? Are there any questions in the room? There usually won't be, but you're doing what you can.
but you can't make the emotional connection by the phone that you can in person. And I think that's the thing you should always remember. If you need to nail something and make an emotional connection, it's face to face.
On that, you talked about the body language, you know, as a presenter, to keep sometimes your audience engaged, whether it's small or large. A lot of people either use hand gestures, focus their eyes on, you know, specific people within the audience that they're looking to. What do you find sort of the best practice?
Can I take a run at this?
Go. You're a gesture
So
guy.
your TED Talk was how many minutes?
The one I
The body
watched?
language one.
20 minutes.
20
maybe
minutes.
20
they're
minutes.
maximum.
20
Yeah,
minutes. So you
yeah.
can go watch the 20-minute video. There's a 4-minute video, or courtesy of Environics, I will give you a 30-second version of this. Are you ready? Has anybody got a stopwatch going? Sure. I'm kidding. I was teasing. There's always one. There's always one. Lift your hands up above your shoulders to indicate energy. It can be one hand or it can be both. Never cross your arms. It means you hate your audience. You can touch your chin. Never touch higher than here. In almost all cultures, it means you're lying. Do make eye contact with the audience. There is something called a power stance. We've heard about this already. You don't do that one when you're presenting. Put your feet about this distance apart and pretend you're in martial arts. Finally, there's something called the truth plane. When you move your hands like this, you look like you're being truthful. You make a point this way, people are tend to believe you. To finish a talk, if you've brought the energy level up, what you do is you lock eyes with people in the room and you nod as you make your point. Almost everybody in the world will nod back at you. I think that was 45 seconds.
41 seconds.
Ah, crap.
I don't pay attention to hand gestures. I do some of the stuff you do. I have touched above my chin before. It didn't mean I was lying, or I hope it didn't. I just try to, when I present to someone, I try to just have a conversation with them. And so if I was talking to a bunch of friends, I wouldn't just sit here motionless. You get some folks that give the way too much. This is nonstop, and that's kind of unacceptable, right? And so I just try to be who I am naturally. And listen, everybody here can become a better presenter, whether you're on stage telling you or in there. So I'm going to learn some tips on how to deliver a killer presentation from you. I will do one of those stances, I think. The truth stance.
The truth plane, truth plane.
Truth plane.
How do you incorporate slides into your presentation?
In slides into my presentations?
Yeah, how do you incorporate that? Surely it's not always just you and the audience. There's some-
Oh, yeah. So there's always, I'll just call them visuals. And visuals could be media, sound, could be live demo, could be slides. There's lots of stuff on the internet to see what makes a bad slide. If you have to read the stuff, it's a bad slide, right? In my line of business, I say a picture's worth 1,000 terabytes, but a picture's worth 10,000 words, and put it up there and speak to it. And that's part of the preparation, right? And that's one thing I've done. And I never used to do. I used to just have bullet points of stuff, and I'd know it and I'd talk about it. It didn't engage the audience. And now I kind of wipe off as much text as I can and talk to it. That way they'll listen to you more instead of reading. So.
But you're in a numbers business. You got
Right, it might be.
your performance charts.
Yeah.
It's hard talking
Yeah,
those.
You need to have those things. But actually, a lot of the times when I am presenting, if it's more of an advice event or a social event, I don't do strictly finance because I'll be the first to admit that it's kind of boring, right?
No.
Just a little
okay. I
bit.
didn't know that.
And if I just did an event, about financial planning, really nobody would come or would really hate me for making them come out to that. And so every single one of my events has a personal aspect to it, or like a cool twist. Like last week, I did an event called Stocks, Suits, and Scotch, because I really like Scotch. We wear suits on a regular basis, and then there was the stocks component. And I go up and I bring my analyst, and we speak about the stocks at the beginning to get the pain over with. And then the suits component was with Harry Rosen, and then he went up and did, here's your Friday blazer, here's some cool trends that are coming in, here's how to stand out. And then the Scotch guy is the signature guy they're all there to see. He's at the end, and we do like a proper tasting and a nosing, and he talks about the history and, what Scotch goes best with breakfast, that kind of
Breakfast.
stuff,
I was back in university. I don't know. That's awesome. And I think that links to something else in terms of when people are talking about engaging presentations is connect with what the people connect to, right? If we can talk about things that we do in everyday life, whether it's a value proposition, I think you had talked about the connected car, right? What's the biggest problem in connected car right now is how do you get updates to the hacks that are available in connected car? You got to bring your car in and check it in for 8 hours. So we can all relate if you're having that speech, right? Because they're going to make that a safety recall eventually, and mandatory, and figure a way to do it over the air. Because can we all appreciate, got to get the kids to school, I got to drop my car off for a 4-hour appointment to get the connected car updated on firmware for a hack. And everyone can appreciate that. So in your clientele you're talking to, they can clearly appreciate the suits. And I think that's awesome, right? So you learn more than just what the talk's about, and there's always value in that, for sure. Yeah.
But to come back to the slide one, you can do a presentation without visuals, just you. It's hard. It also, if people don't like you, and sometimes you'll be doing a presentation. Have I gone quiet, by the way? Oh, okay. There's still sound coming out of my mouth. I know, I wasn't sure. I find that having visuals sometimes, it also depends on cultures, gives people somewhere else to look than your face the entire time, and that can be helpful. But the other thing I do, there's a Guy Kawasaki has a rule, 10, 20, 30, what is it, 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30-point font, big pictures, not a lot of words. All true, all true, all true. Most people they put thousands of words on each slide, and they then read the slides to the audience. Never do this. But you know what? Occasionally, and it's all about changing tempo, sometimes you got to throw up a slide that's just got a lot of numbers on it, and you walk them through it as long as it's not all of them. But occasionally, having that, because audiences, it's like, who would be a good example? Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart's a really great guy on TV. Do you know that half his audience, 3/4 of his audience, doesn't get 1 out of every 8 jokes? That's cool. They go, man, he's smart. Occasionally, having stuff there that really challenges and pushes your audience, that forces them to actually think and like, wow, that's hard to deal with. I think that's one of the ways you keep their interest. You're not just throwing stuff at them. You're actually forcing them to do some of the work inside their own heads.
Well, and I think you're hitting on know your audience, first of all, right? And if they're expecting those types of details. And the other is, there's no steadfast rules. There's all these techniques and tools, and you're going to find the tools that suit your personality, your style, your topic, your size of conversation, and detail correctly. And you're absolutely right. If I have to put up some details, and I will, I'll do that, but I'll talk intelligently to it, but it can't be overwhelming.
And you go slow when you do it.
That's right. You nailed it. So what all advice we're giving, there's no rule, like 30 point. Not everything's going to be 30 point. That's life. So. We have more questions?
I was just going to, just to pick up on what you said, there was a question online about how do you get to know, like what efficient ways are there to get to know your audience before you give them a presentation? Is there anything that you do to try to get to know your audience before you're up there?
I think the best you can try to do is mingle, and when you first get there, if that's something that you are apt to doing. I like what North of 41 does because you have a list of everyone who is attending or has registered. So if you had the time, you could, the internet is a creepy thing. You could look up every single person if you wanted to and find out everything you wanted. And sometimes if I go to a networking event where I'm not presenting, but I'm going there from a business development standpoint, I will try to find who is going and then kind of have my targets for the evening.
Yeah, you try to know your audience. Depends on the size.
Right.
If it's a small audience, like I said, I'll LinkedIn them. If I was speaking at a conference at a room this size, and I know the topic, I know what the conference is about, I'll know what level, what's the tech level, so I'll always ask. You always run into problems. People always tell me, oh, it's super technical, and they're not, or they're more technical than they think. But and then the other thing is, if it's a keynote, I mean, you're not going to be able to know that. You're going to have to know the themes. And so again, it's the size of it that's going to let you get personalized or coursified or granularized on how you know people. So I think working the room ahead of time is good. And if for any reason other than that, people don't sit in the audience. Like if I'm sitting at an Oracle presentation, I actually want them to fail. But most people don't want the presenter to fail. They want to come and learn something and be engaged. And so when you go out and you speak ahead of time like you do, you finally have made some connections, and you might have some friends in the audience, and when you're up there, they're rooting for you, you're obviously rooting for you, and that would help. So I like that idea. That's a good idea.
Some of it's like, I mean, that's great. Look up on LinkedIn. Has anybody here ever done 6 presentations in a day? Okay, no, you can't do the research before the meetings.
Sometimes you can't.
Sometimes you can't. Know your audience. If you're in if you're in the eastern part of, I was in Montreal. What NFL team do people in Montreal cheer for? Do you guys know?
Patriots.
Patriots, totally. Toronto, it's the Bills. Vancouver, it's the Seahawks. You can play this game a little. Language, culture. Anybody here Turkish? We have no Turks in the room.
I'm Greek, it's like the
That's
opposite of
really the opposite, yeah. But it's sort of
We're good
there's
now, we're good.
you know how to say thank you in Turkish? Anybody in the room? It's really hard. Teşekkür ederim. I have nailed that one to the point where I've said it and had people start saying Turkish back to me. Learn a couple words. Dankeschön, merci bien, bonne journée, whatever. If you can, make it look honest and real, and I am in your country, I am in your city, I am your honored guest, I'm doing what little I can. I find that really does tend to
Trying
help
to
a lot.
connect to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it.
Make that connection.
For some hands? Yes.
What about the poor Hungarian lady here? Budahaj.
Köszönöm szépen.
Ah, see, I know kusanem as well. And aside from that, it's all food, but that's because I had a Hungarian great-grandmother. So.
Do you have personal examples of when something went wrong and how you survived them?
Yeah, you want to go
We all
first?
do.
We're not looking at each other because like we don't. We're looking at it
I'm
because we have
trying
a
to think of
plethora
which,
of.
example I'd like to tell you. I'd say I need to think a little longer.
All right, my first one I ever did, and one I had about 2 years ago were two of my worst. So the first one I ever did, I go down to a PeopleSoft conference. I had about 180 people in the room, and I was presenting, and I got really nervous. And someone asked me a question, I didn't know it. So at that time, I didn't have the maturity to know that it's okay not to know the answer, right? So that's the first thing. And I started stuttering, and then I was like, I don't know why I can't say that word. And yet I was saying that out loud into everybody. And of course, it's because you're nervous, asshole, right? That's the reason why I can't say the word. I finished that. I marched right back to my hotel. First time ever at Narlands. Went out and got drunker than a hillbilly that night. Then I matured, and then about a year and a half ago, I had my second worst presentation. I was with a regulatory commission out of Washington on securities. And I came in there, and honestly, the audience were jerks, right? There were about 10 people. I didn't prepare as much for them as I should have, so to the preparation on the topics, and they let me have it, making comments about my laptop and all that. And I looked at the clock, and I swear to God, it's a 45-minute meeting. That clock was at 10 to 4, 10 minutes left. And that hand did not move. It sat there forever, and that's a lonely place to be. And finally, I just said, hey, guys, you know, and you can't do this on a keynote, you can do this on a personal audience. Listen, you know, I don't want to waste your valuable time. I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to waste my time either. I came down here. If I don't have the kind of stuff you're looking for, why don't we stop this, right? Because we shouldn't just go on, which was code for, get me out of here, right? So those are kind of, don't happen often. And then, when they happen, I think they make you sharper and want to work harder to not let them happen again. But
I got two stories that mean a lot to me. One is I was doing a presentation, and I cited something that had been told to me as fact. And not only a random person in the room, the chair of the board and majority owner of the company I was presenting to said, actually, I'm a radiologist, and what you just said is completely untrue. I think I hear my mother calling. What did I do? Nothing. Blew my credibility. I have been invited back, but it harmed the relationship. Never say things that you don't actually know. Don't wing it. If somebody tells you something and it's good enough to make a good story, double check. That won't kill you. Because you can blow your credibility so fast and so hard. The second story is really weird, and it's not going to resonate like that when it's not. I was in France. I was in Mulhouse, which is in Alsace, deep south of Alsace. And I present to people all around the world. And we're Western here, North America. We're not just, God, we're obsessed with money and things. Somebody asked me a question about, that was really great, but you keep talking, what's the social implication of what you just said? But they didn't phrase it quite that way, and I went back, and I didn't understand, and I looked like a moron. I looked like a selfish North American pig, materialist moron, and everybody in the audience hated me, and they should have, because I was being all that. And that lesson was, try to think about your audience. There's a lot of different questions out there, and do try to think about stuff that CEOs don't just think about, but sometimes normal people do. That's hard. I mean, we all try to be empathic, but putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, the best people in the world are probably 1% good at that.
And that's how you prep for a presentation. Put yourself in the audience. Would you want to sit through your own stuff? And I say that to my team. Ashwin's on my team here. And it's like, would you sit through your own stuff? And if the answer is no, your stuff's not good enough. So.
Good question. Do you want to go?
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask in terms of how do you deal with the disruptors? People that disrupt your presentation, whether it's questions or they simply interrupt right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
You know,
So
they don't agree at all with what you're saying and they're quite blunt and they kind of take over.
it's interesting what kind of disruptor you'll get. So I've had all kinds. So I've had the disruptor who's on my side but wants everyone in the room to know they're the smartest person in the room. I got a lead DBA from Visa, does it every presentation, and I introduce her to the crowd and then sit her down. I've been given a presentation where I had a person who used to be an analyst, came to us for a job, didn't hire, they worked for a competitor, started asking competitive questions, and I put them in their place because I know what they were doing. So I think you handle it quickly, you move ahead. If you're disruptive with bad intentions and you're quick on your feet, I would make it so it's uncomfortable for them to disrupt. Nothing will stop a disruptor like a quick remark or joke. If they're a disruptor just because they're trying to be the smartest, figure out a way to acknowledge how smart they are and then move on. Those are the two disruptors that I found. I know. Do you get a lot of disruptors?
Not too much,
Yeah.
but I think if someone is speaking in the back, or perhaps they're obviously on their phone and it's bothering me, while I'm walking, I'll just walk closer to them. And the closer I get, the more they will go back. And then if they don't and they're totally oblivious, then I'll do what you just said and make a joke or a comment or make them feel uncomfortable and be like, oh, like something's really interesting there. You want to share it with us?
But some of it's cultural, because you'll get this when you're in China and people pick the phone like this and start talking right in the middle of your speech. You're like,
They just do that.
yeah, but that's the cultural thing, right?
Yeah.
So know where you are culturally. In some places, that's good, right?
But I know exactly what you're talking about. There's two things that I'd add to what my colleagues have said. One, the moderator is your friend. If you're having trouble by yourself, you can shoot a glance and that'll help. Do you know what the second is? It's understanding a very complex thing, in my view. Sometimes there is no perfect answer. Having them shot is probably an overreaction, but emotionally you're going to feel like that because you're feeling like they're ruining the presentation, they're ruining me, they're ruining it for the audience. And what you need to tell yourself is, no, they're not. Everybody in the room knows that person, that man, that woman is being a jerk. And they're not thinking badly of you. They're not thinking badly of the event. They do want it to go away. I've had people in the crowd say, sit down and shut up, because they'll. So, but if you can remember in your heart, I guess, not your brain, if you can remember that it's actually not about you, it's about them, that really helps take the emotion. Because if you get angry, that's when the interrupter has won, right?
I think setting the stage is important too. Like maybe look at
And
that.
dim the lights.
Okay.
Someone forget to pay the bill?
That's a gentle hint if I've ever seen one.
That will happen in
Okay,
a
see you
presentation
later.
sometimes too. You just keep going, right? Just keep going.
Setting the stage and maybe saying questions will absolutely be held until the end and that you won't address any. If that makes you
If they're
feel
slowing you
comfortable,
down,
then you just say that at the beginning before the interrupter even has a.
Or you say, hey, listen, we can talk about this after. I'll make myself available to you and stuff like that. So different ways.
Most people have been doing pitches. What are your thoughts on timing of your ask? Like beginning and end, and follow up after a presentation, after a pitch?
My gut response is the beginning. I mean, we're all just in this world of being perpetually busy and overwhelmed with like so much stuff to do, and we want it to be a good use of our time. So I think it's almost like think back to elementary school or high school when you first started writing an essay, right? Like in your introduction, do your ask, then get into the reasons and substantiate why, and then in your conclusion, you're just reiterating what you've asked for. So make it like a sandwich.
I didn't quite hear you quite. So you were saying, when do you put your ask in your pitch?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And that's from like pursuing VC from that perspective?
Or you're trying to sell a specific.
Yeah. For me, my ask is usually an ask for partnership at the end, and it starts with the identification of the business problem or what bothers you, right? It may not be a business problem. I just try to kind of figure out that my ask is going to be your partnership to solve what your problem is. And that works. But it all depends on what you're doing. To your point, sometimes the ask has got to be up front, and here's why we should ask for that business. So you're going to adjust it on what you're doing.
I have a different view. From your question. If you are giving a presentation, if you are giving a pitch, if they don't know what your ask is after 20, 40, 60 minutes, you're doing it wrong. And let me give you, what our job is sales and marketing. Emphasis. Have you ever seen a Coke commercial where at the end of it with the luscious droplets pouring down and the young people where they say, now go out and buy a Coke? There's no ask. They create a demand, a need. At the end of it, you're supposed to be begging, where do I find a Coke? They don't actually need to tell you that. Properly done.
It'll depend on your audience, right? Obviously, like I think that's an awesome example, to be honest. They don't tell me to go buy a Coke. I'm hooked. In VC, you're going to ask for, this is the amount of money I want. Or if I'm doing contract paper with someone, I'm going to say, look, we'd like to do this deal and that kind of stuff. So again, what we said, these are all techniques, and you're going to have a tool belt, and you're going to use pieces and tools in the tool belt for the opportunity at hand. So.
For startups that don't have money to fly across, and you end up doing phone pitches, B2B sales, what do you do?
Sorry, this is looking for money or sales?
Sales. B2B sales over the phone.
Of what kind of product?
Software.
Enterprise, consumer?
Enterprise.
No. Change business lines? No.
I need to go back with that tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you've got to work within the tools and the mediums that you're given with. So, quite frankly, you'll do better off if you could do it, face to face, but you can't. So, you've got to think of, that's probably where even more personalization we're getting, maybe leveraging video in there and not just phone, right? Or understanding their business and stuff like that. But I mean, listen, we all nobody wants to just buy over the phone blindly, I don't find. Although, listen, in software, that's completely changing now with the cloud. People will go and purchase through the cloud it's line of business purchasing without an IBM salesperson coming in and talking to you. So you just keep working on your value techniques, get value up front, and communicate it, and you work within those boundaries, I think. So.
I've probably seen, I used to be a tech investor, public and venture capital. I've probably seen on the close order of 2,000 to 3,000 pitches of software. Some were equivalent to over the phone. Of the software demos I've seen, I remember 2. It can be done. It can be done, but man, is it not easy.
Can I chime in?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, chime in.
I've been in that space, in that position for quite a long time. What I find really helps is if you can find a champion internally first and build a relationship, that's going to help you quite a bit. Then you can pick their brain and get an idea of what the audience member is going to want to hear, who they are, and things like that. That usually helps quite a bit.
Some inside info, right? Yeah, great point. Great point.
I think hearing what about those 2 you remember and why they stand out in your mind would be valuable.
I lied. I don't actually remember 2. No. One of them was PC Docs. PC Docs showed, and this was early, this was 94, 95. PC Docs is a Canadian-based software company, document management. Did a demo over the phone, and it was just so compelling. The other one was, I'm blanking on the name. It's a software company, starts with a K, does HR software. They got bought years ago by a private equity firm. Anyway, once again, they just demoed through it. What about it stood out? Yeah. I pictured being somebody who did that kind of HR stuff, and it was like the UI was obvious, it flowed, I could actually see decision items coming out, and I was like, I'm not even in HR and I want to go buy this software. So it was just, the demo was such that it actually worked for me.
I can say one thing about that. I purchased software for our company, so enterprise level software purchasing. One of the things that I always ask somebody that's pitching me software, whether it's on the phone, email, webinar, I ask for references in the neighborhood. And that doesn't mean the person next door, but I want to talk to somebody who's in my geographic area, possibly in the same industry, the same size. Somebody that I can relate to, not somebody in San Jose who I have no idea what the culture is like there, their business is like, etc. So just knowing that that company has customers in my area, they're interested, they're not just cold calling across the country to find a new customer.
That's a great idea. What kind of software do you sell?
It's analytics on top of biomedical literature.
What kind of software do you buy? It's kind of neat afterwards, right? But
20%.
yeah. I think there's a question.
At the back.
So what's the best presentation you've ever given, and what made it that way? The experience that you have, not the result necessarily, but the experience that you have.
I'm not going to be cheesy and say I have yet to give my best presentation, but I know when I capture the audience and they learned something but had a great laugh, then I know I hit it. So my New York Strata one was like that. Probably got about 60,000 views on YouTube. I had one a couple weeks ago in Arrow. It was about just 200 people. You just genuinely felt the vibe in the audience. So, you'll hit that vibe and they're amongst your best. I don't know if I've ever one stands out. And that's the stuff that fuels you more, I think, right? I mean, I get a high off that when I know I've hit it, and I get a low when I don't. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I mean, your best would be your largest client investor, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that would be great,
that would be the best result, for sure. I'd say one of the presentations I liked that I did the most was the way I played with the PowerPoint. So all of the slides were just numbers. So like if you looked at the slide, it was just like a big number 7. And then I would be like 7 correlates to whatever stat I was going to say. And then I would, go on tangents and talk about this. And then I'd go to the next. So those were just my cues, having those big numbers. And I think they helped engage everybody. And it also had like a nice flow to it.
I've had some really fun times for me and the audience, but I actually want to tell a story about myself because I think it, once again, has a lesson that maybe will apply. I was fairly young, 30-something. I was sick as a pig. This was RSP season. I was doing the mutual fund, dog and pony show, 6-7 presentations a day, and I got sick. I got so sick, you just can't believe. Luckily, I was in Vancouver, and my former father-in-law was a doctor, and he gave me some cough syrup because I had this terrible cough and I couldn't present. And I drank it, and I felt much better, but it was the weekend, and then I went off to Calgary, where I did a presentation. He had warned me it was slightly unusual in that it was significantly stronger than they were allowed to prescribe to elephants or horses. And I drank it. It was filled with codeine. There were crystals of codeine floating around on the top. I drank it. I stopped coughing, which was good.
That's because you were asleep.
I wasn't. People who had seen me do the same roadshow 30, 50, 60, 90 times said it was the best presentation I'd ever done because I calmed the heck down. Concert violinists take beta blockers because otherwise they play the notes too fast. And no, please, I am not endorsing opiate abuse among the speaking community, and getting drunk before a presentation is a bad idea. But mentally saying, they already like me. They're here. They want to see a presentation. Take it down half a notch is sort of a lesson that I kind of learned that day. And I calmed down a little, and I think it's helped make every presentation, maybe not the best ever, but better than it was before.
So one beer.
Right.
Or some scotch.
Yeah.
Scotch, apparently.
Can I add another one to that? That just popped in my mind. So one of the first jobs I had was right after I went to the University of Guelph, and then when I graduated from there, I worked as a liaison officer, which is the person that drives around in this minivan and goes to all the high schools in Ontario and says, "Go to Guelph, it's a great university." And at the time, all of my counterparts from all the other universities were using PowerPoint. And then they would just go up and they would talk about the BCom and the BA and the Bachelor of Science. And it was just the same stuff over and over again. So we decided that year we weren't going to do PowerPoint, and we just went up there and we spoke, not about the degrees, but about the experiences. So there was this one student, she was in the Bachelor of Arts and Sciences program, and this is this really cool project that she worked on, and this was her experience. And then if you turn to page like 42 in your view book, you'll learn more about it. And we had all the page numbers memorized already. And that always was more of an engaging presentation. And I'll tell you, if you want to get good at presenting, then present to students or to kids, because they are the most honest audience you'll ever have. They will really tune out if they don't like what you're saying. They might even throw things at you. And you will get that feedback that you want right away. And also, they're very influenced by the cool kid in the room, right? And there's always going to be that cool kid, even when we're in an adult situation. And if the cool kid or that influencer likes what you're saying and is agreeing, then everybody else tends to agree as well. And if they don't like what you're saying, then the mood changes and everybody immediately kind of squashes that. So what I started to do when I first was feeling a bit uncomfortable doing all of my presentations in my adult life, is I would secretly invite a few friends of mine to come as oh, I don't know who you are, I'm meeting you for the first time. But I would have them there because I knew they would laugh at my jokes. I knew that they would nod their heads and engage, and then that sort of kind of spread amongst the room, and it helped.
I can't trust my friends. They don't get it right, right? It's not going to end well. It's not good for me.
I need some new friends.
That's right.
Oh, we'll just do another.
I know that some people create their own presentations, some people use design firms. Do you guys create your own presentations, or do you hire specialists, or do you have teams of people that...
That's a great question. So from IBM, we have very corporate stuff, and Ashwin, I think this sucks. And they get a design firm for a keynote. I actually make my own stuff. So I went and took a couple Photoshop courses, and I took some design, and you start, and this is a great leading question, because you ask, how do you build these visually engaging slides? You know what? I think I did a talk with, since it's kind of VC here, with Bruce Croxon, and I have done a lot of chats together on big data, a guy from Dragon's Den, and he said that the one thing that you always remember is there's no new idea. There's very few new ideas. It's about who's executing. So I go and sit in a presentation, and just the other day I sketched down someone from EMC who had this good visual on how to show a blocker to value. You'll see, go to SlideShare, and you'll see some slides, and you'll say, wow, that's a great format, how they put the gray smoke in the middle. And I have this file of about 50 different templates that I've just created or stole from site, and then I make it my own and I put that. That's where I get the creativity from. Because if you start outsourcing to this design, and don't get me wrong, it's great if I'm doing some kind of video, it's great for the big keynote. But on the individual, it won't get personalized, and that's not agile, you're paying for it, go back and forth. So go find some royalty-free pictures, so 123RF, I'm not advertising, that's who I use, 123rf.com. But Shutterfly, I think, would be another, something like that. Go and look at SlideShare and designs, make those kinds of notes, and I like to create my own, and then took my own learning under my own agenda. And I think that separated me from the traditional IBM presentation that people get, which is hard for me because I'm in a big corporate. They're going to be cooler because you're media, right?
No, I'm at Deloitte. We got 220,000 people around the world, a $25 billion company.
So
I am under continual fear that I'm going to be up there because I make my own slides, and somebody from Deloitte brand is going to bring me down with a blowgun.
All the time.
Yeah,
all the
so
time. Yeah.
I do my own stuff.
Yeah, and let yourself come through, right?
Yeah.
So pick up those skills. That's what I would do, right? Yep. You know, what was it? No, I wasn't using that. Like if you're on a Mac, Pixelmator, awesome low-cost app that lets you kind of start to play with that stuff. So lots of little techniques to do that. But steal. Don't steal copyright infringements. Steal ideas. Yeah. I think there's a question here.
Yeah, so how do you prepare for a panel discussion? Do you get the questions ahead of time, or do you just wait?
I know, I got a bunch of questions 10 days ago. I printed them out today. I looked at them when I sat down here, and then she showed me a bunch of questions that were completely different. So, to be honest,
slightly different.
yeah, I'm just kidding. To be honest, you had a great question when you said panel, because I'll tell you a really crappy keynote that I've seen, and it was an IBM executive that did it. Used crib notes or was reading a teleprompter. And if you sound scripted, you're dead. And nothing that you have said or you have said sounded even remotely scripted. And to me, that's how I'd like to look at some questions. I'm going to expect questions come from the audience. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't memorize. That's probably one thing I'll tell you. Do not memorize your narrative. It'll change time to time. Current events will change things, right? There'll be a big fumble in a football game the other day, and you'll be in Patriots territory. You want to make that comment. Do not memorize your script. Memorize your facts and your storyline. And I would say the same for a panel. I just throw it at me and we'll be able to answer it. Right?
Usually the rule of thumb is if you've been asked to be on a panel, it's because you've got domain expertise. You're a subject matter expert. Be that person, be nice to the fellow panelists, it'll go fine.
You're a nice guy. That's good. Yeah.
I arrived late, so if this was covered earlier, apologies. In terms of the trade-off between accessibility and production value, with the rise of Meerkat and Periscope for accessibility and reaching an audience, just wondered if you had any comments about trade-off, like you talked about webinars and video, but now you're talking about live streams over Twitter. So if I wanted to present to a group on the fly, in a sense, or without a lot of build-up, I can do it, but just wondered your thoughts or comments on that emerging.
Would I do it or allow it?
What are your thoughts on it?
Always act like the microphone is on. Always assume that somebody could be taping you, recording you. Always assume that's the case, and you'll be cool. I don't think you can stop people. I've had people shoot little videos of me and stuff, and like, it's okay. It's usually low quality and not that good, and it probably harms brand or whatever, but you can't really stop it, and you'd look like a thug if you did. So you can't. Would I use it as a tool? A Vine? A 7-second pitch or something like that? Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's different.
That's cool.
But
yeah.
Meerkat and Periscope for an actual presentation?
I'm old-fashioned, I guess, but
yeah.
They're actually having a webinar, or now they're using Blab, but they were using a Google Hangout, but they were also doing a cross stream on Periscope. Just again, just for exponential reach.
Yeah.
No, it's not a bad idea at all. My only problem with everything over the internet still. Listen, I still drop a freaking cell phone call when I take the 407 up to Markham, right? And even at Netflix at home, jitters right in the middle of Narcos and right in the scene, right? I just don't trust that stuff. Everyone seen the show, right?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. All right, you gotta see it. And so I just don't have the trust in that medium yet. And I know I'm not cool enough. I'm not the young millennial yet, but it'll get there. But you know, for me, I wouldn't rely on that, but if it augments what I'm doing, then no problem, right? As you said, broader accessibility, so.
Yeah, I find them a bit short for podiums. And so I was wondering if you had any advice for if you're doing a presentation, you have to step away from the podium and like give your talk that way.
First of all,
it's podia.
Oh, I didn't know that was
Not true. No, never use a podium.
Yeah, just get rid of it.
The only reason I ever have a podium is if my laptop is sitting there.
Yeah.
I don't want to hide behind the podium. Makes you look small, even if you're tall.
And the second thing is this: if you're nervous, gripping the podium like it's a life raft is not. It's a bad visual.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I hate the podium, quite frankly. You should walk. Then you can look at this side of the room, walk here, come over to here, and that kind of stuff.
Do you have any advice though for when you're like not using it though?
For
When you're not using the phone, like when you're standing there giving the talk, do you have any advice?
yeah, I would go and I would work the stage. I would walk to this side, especially in a large keynote, but even in a smaller one, if this was me doing a presentation here, I would move to each side and speak to each side to pull each side in. And quite frankly, if you go to a U2 concert, Bono will do the exact same thing, right? So.
I'll add to that too. A bad presentation I saw once, and actually the presentation itself was quite good, but the speaker was walking back and forth way too much.
Yeah.
I felt like I was going to barf all over the place. I was getting really nauseous. I just couldn't not look at her walking back and forth. And then the laptop reminded me of something. The best $20 you'll ever spend is the clicker.
Yeah.
Don't ever go to your laptop and hit next or get someone to go and do it for you and then be like, oh, sorry, go back. You know, like you want to be in control, and it's so common sense, but.
I'm going to up that. The best $100 you'll ever spend. 79 at Shop.ca is this Logitech RS800. It's got a built-in timer, and it buzzes in your hand with 5 minutes left.
It's good.
Way better.
Way better at any time. You know, you do a big fancy keynote, you'll get a clock and some jerks in the back telling you get up. But that buzzer in your hand, that is the best. It can even buzz you if you're behind, and yeah, spend that and guard it with your life. It's good. Yeah.
One thing I will add,
Good
just
advice
because
on that.
you're wearing flats, do you wear heels ever?
Not really.
Okay, but I will say this because a lot of women, well, those are decent ones. There's two things women with heels tend to do when there's no podium. They either cross their legs real tight, and it's the opposite of a power stance. Think about how easily you could push me over and you're always fighting. The other thing they do is they get nervous and they flop on the heel and they roll over. It's sort of like, if you think about it, like if you've ever seen 13-year-old girls standing around at a bus stop, they do that out of nervousness, right? And it's visually distracting, and it also makes you look like you're off balance. So be careful about those when you're on stage.
Observations that you have. I've never thought to look.
Yeah.
Okay. Next time, when someone's with heels on a keynote, I'll be like, there, heel roll. I don't know what's going on.
That's it. I wear heels all the time.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you roll?
I probably will now. Yeah.
Yes.
Any favorite strategies for when you're first opening a speech, capturing the audience? You mentioned that, doing a fact or something like that, but just in general, that you guys go to?
I try to hit a joke within the first couple minutes, or a fact, both times. Like either one will be that. I also, I try to quickly, I've written up like about 19 books, and I know that I'll capture that audience if they know what my background is. So if they haven't published my bio, but you don't want to do it implicitly, throw it in your face kind of thing. It's got to be light. And I'll just be like, here's my Twitter handle. Everything you see in Twitter or on this presentation is actually going to show up in Twitter first, and then move on. But my bio's there. Just try to get some credibility depending on that audience. So you can't spend too much time yourself, absolutely. But yeah, fire that joke or stat.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know.
I'd say the risk with the joke is that nobody laughs.
That's it.
Right?
You
and
gotta
then
make sure.
Yes, it's got to be foolproof, like
It's
practice,
nervous
tried, trusted, and true. Because if they don't laugh, not only is it awkward for them, but like it deflates you. I think, right? Then I'm like, oh man, they all hate me and they're judging me. But what you do want to do is you want to get people nodding right away, because then they're like agreeing with you physically and emotionally. So whether it's, I mean, I hate talking about the weather, so don't do that. But something, I mean, you were alluding earlier to, you know, where you are, right? So perhaps something has happened in that state or in that country, or something topical, whatever people are talking about these days. And maybe you say something, and then people agree, and then you move on to what you want to say.
But I want to really stress what was said, joke or fact, in the first couple of minutes. There is a thing in newspapers called the pyramid lead, where the most important thing you write in your entire article is the first thing you say. The second most important thing is the second thing you say, because people don't keep reading newspaper articles. They 80-90% stop after the first paragraph. We used to think that was true about TV shows. You would write a pilot, and it was supposed to be your best episode, and you had to introduce all the characters and have all your best jokes, because the pilot was the thing that got the series made. Netflix yesterday released a study showing that of their successful shows, Breaking Bad, they don't have Narcos yet, but of all these shows, the point at which the audience becomes committed usually occurs around the 4th to 5th episode. And Ted Carnaros, the head of content at Netflix, I think that's his name. There we go. He said, what we tell people is you're not writing a newspaper story. Think about your first episode as chapter 1 of your speech is a book. You don't have to cook them with the first line. You've got a lot of, not forever, but you've got minutes in there. So don't think too much about that first sentence. It's not the first sentence.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely.
What's the first sentence of Gone with the Wind? Everybody? What's the last sentence?
Scarlett, I don't give a damn?
It's actually not, but anyway, but everybody thinks it is. But
it's the only thing I know from that movie.
But we think about it more that way. Endings are probably more important than beginnings.
So we'll do one more question, and then maybe I'll just ask each of you one last, just like your top tip to share with everyone. And then please, there's refreshments, there's some drinks, and you can still have a chance to talk with the panelists.
Well then, it's not exactly your top tips, but over the course of the evening you've mentioned a few of them, but could you each maybe say one big faux pas, like something you should never do during a presentation?
We've already said some, like don't read your material.
Yeah. Big ones maybe.
That's the biggest, I think, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is, if someone is reading to you, you're dead. It is dead, right? That's the biggest one by far, but what else?
Or even biggest mistakes other people have made that you noticed.
There's so many, right? Well, no, because there's so many different.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 2015, kids. No racism, no sexism, don't be an idiot.
I saw.
Don't. It's not funny. Especially, and the one I gotta hit is gender. A lot of the jokes that men think are funny are not funny. Run them past 43 of your closest female friends and just make sure, because most of them aren't funny.
I think that's a great tip. I was out at doing a conference right before the 3M Golf Invitational, and I'd done my presentation. Another guy came up there from another company, and he was talking and trying to create an analogy with a clutch car, and he goes, "For you ladies, that's the pedal on the," and I was like, and you could see people like, "You asshole," right? Like you could just see it. I totally agree. It's not even funny. I don't even know why someone thinks it's funny, so don't go there. Mine is, maybe it's a mixture of the worst and my tip. You always hear this term, death by PowerPoint, right? But I'm here to tell you it's not death by PowerPoint. It is death by whomever's freaking presenting. It could be death by panel, death by PowerPoint, death by Prezi, death by whiteboard, right? And so the biggest tip I would say is make sure you're not killing the people that are listening to you, and worry about afterwards. Because you know what, I use a lot of PowerPoint, and I'll use a lot of animation where it almost looks like a movie and a lot of the stuff there, and the right slides, and it goes a lot better than some other stuff. Yeah, so keep away from death by presenter is my biggest tip.
The whole death by PowerPoint thing is saying, like, I won't read books in Times New Roman.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a font.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, and you know, it's a favorite saying. We were with Under Armour, and the CEO of IBM, Ginny Rometty, was sitting there with Kevin Plank. He says, "Oh, well, we don't do PowerPoint anymore." And I'm on next. And I'm like, what is going on, right? And then I went up and presented in front of them, and it had animation PowerPoint. I went into a demo, and it was back to what I said. Don't be death by presenter. Whatever medium you choose. That's my tips.
I'd say if you're going to practice or prepare something other than your material, then it's your pace. You don't want to speak too fast. I used to try to cram too much in an hour, and I'd talk really, really, really fast, and I got really good at speaking really fast, and I would lose people because I was trying to cram too much in. So that's maybe the worst. And then a tip that's associated with that would be, if you are nervous, because then you're going to speak faster, just take like a really deep breath before. Because I used to work in competitive recruits for the firm, and where we would go in and do, the horse and pony show, like, this is why you want to come over to Dominion Securities. And there was a really big deal one, and we had our CEO in there, and I was nervous, and I was waiting outside, and I didn't breathe before I went in. And I got in there, I started talking really fast, and then within like about 30 seconds, I had to go, and then I kept talking, and I was like, oh my God, that was so weird, and it like ruined the, it was
replay, that was weird.
And every time that I went into one of those competitive recruit meetings after that, like outside, I'd be like,
You know, you said one thing, and you had alluded to it earlier, but you just come on and say it when you said about speaking fast. If you're speaking into a different country, for me, you got an hour pitch in North America. If that's coming to China or Japan, you better 40, 35. So knowing the culture and the language, right, is English a second language. That's tops, and the other is cultural stuff. So in India, I was getting a speech there, and the front row was like, I don't know if anyone's been to India and you speak, but that actually means, oh, I totally agree, we agree, you're an expert, right? It absolutely does. And I was sitting there going, well, what's going on here? And I actually stopped I go, am I saying something? Oh, no, this means yes, we agree with you in India. So know where you're at, what language do they speak, and cultural stuff.
So I'm gonna push on something that this is me. Don't talk too fast. I talk a little fast, you may have noticed. Don't talk too slow. Here's what I'm going to say. Here are the 3 things I'm going to say. Here's the first thing I'm saying. Let me summarize what I just said and go back. Now I'm going to tell you point number 2. Here is point number 2. Let's go back at 1 and 2 and make sure you got. There are people who tell you to do that. It doesn't work for me. I have left presentations where it's not the pace of words, it's the pace of ideas. And if your pace of ideas is super, super, super slow, that's an hour of my time where I learn one thing.
It's like excessive voice prompts, right? It pisses you off when you make a phone call. It'll tick you off when you get presented to. So that's a good one.
Too slow can, I think, also be bad.
That's great. Thank you so much.
We don't get our last comment? I had a story.
Oh, go ahead.
I thought that was our
No, you were going to ask me, what's the best presentation I ever saw? Can I do my story?
Yes.
I have a good story. In 1998, I was at the American Society for Clinical Oncology in New Orleans at the plenary session. There were 15,000 people in the room. They had been working at that point on a specific kind of cancer called GIST, G-I-S-T. It was incurable. You got it, you died. You died within about 6 months. It had been a bad time in cancer therapies. Just people had worked, and we'd stalled out. It had been 10, 15 years since the last breakthrough. They, in the plenary session, had as an opening comment a new kind of treatment called called kinase inhibitors. There was a small trial, 40 people with a cancer. Everybody who was in the control arm was not getting a drug, right? You got placebo. Everybody who was in the drug arm, 20 people only, got the drug. They put up the results, and on the first slide they said, "We're really sorry, we had to halt the trial." Everybody in the control arm was getting sick, and we had a 100% response rate in the drug arm. Every single person with a cancer that never went away, their cancers vanished within a couple of weeks. We had to stop because it was unethical. And they stopped talking at that moment. And 15,000 people fell silent just reading the slide because the data was unbelievable. You never see this in cancer. And after about 10 or 12 seconds, they literally leapt to their feet and applauded because these are all oncologists. Somebody had just come up with an entire new class that now sells hundreds of billions of dollars around the world, and it saves people's goddamn lives. And I don't remember whether they use PowerPoint. I don't know what color their slide was. And I certainly don't know what font they used and what type. If your material is that good, you will always blow an audience away. So it's not just about sharpening the axe. If your material is good, your voice, your control, your microphone, your heels, your pacing, none of it matters. Because if you're delivering a message that's that effective, it will be effective in spite of.
Now imagine if those 20 people walked on stage. Now that would have really blown you away.
It was a cancer conference, so you don't. That would have been cool, but that's the Oprah version of the cancer conference.
Very good. Very good. Okay.
Thank
well, I
you
guess
so
we'll
much.
mingle.
Mingle.
Thank you so much.
That's all right. I got it in there, right?
You did.
She got it in there. It was a good story, actually. It's a really good story.
That's fun.
Well,
Hey,
because
check that TED Talk.
when we're at things like this, we spend all of our time talking about the slides and so forth, and it's like, oh yeah, right, the material.
There's a TED Talk from the guy at Netflix about how we should approach cancer, if you ever see that. That's probably one of the best TED Talks.
Oh, I'd like to learn more about that. 'Cause I
Yeah, he's
just
from
get
Netflix.
awkward.
He goes,
Yeah.
why am a media guy from Netflix talking about cancer? And he's awesome. He's awesome.
Netflix guy cancer.
Yeah, go to Netflix, Cancer Talk, and I'll email it to you if I don't
Rachel, there was
find
only
it.
two
But,
questions that I have.
Great.